BBC News.
Now on Radio 4, it's 75 years since the Spanish Civil War and an extraordinary evacuation that saw 5,000 Spanish children shipped from Bilbao, which was about to be overrun by Franco's forces, to Southampton, where they were cared for by a network of colonies throughout the UK. This is their story in Havana.
We're going to sing a song now about the evacuation of the Basque children from Bilbao in May 1937. My father was one of those children. And it's called Only for 3 months. And the reason it's called Only for 3 months is because that is what the parents said to them when they left them at the quayside. And the evacuation happened after the bombing of Guernica. So this is called Only for 3 months. Thank you. I'm Rob Garcia, and this is part of a concert I performed recently with my folk duo, Namara. That's myself on guitar with singer-songwriter Paul McNamara. I was born and raised in the UK, and I was fairly typical of a child growing up in the late 60s and early 70s. I went to school in North London, where the playground was a mix of cultures, but my Spanish heritage had always been there in the background. As a musician, I've been able to tap into that mixed culture and to tell in words and music stories like this one, a part of Spanish and British history, but also the story of my own family.
It was 1937, upon the 21st of May, that we boarded the Havana, and from home we sailed away. Solo por 3 meses, we heard our mother say, and to England we were taken, and it's there for many years we were destined to stay.
That's part of a song written by Namara that tells my father's story. Fausto Garcia, one of the Niños Vascos, 4,000 children from the Basque Country who were brought to England 75 years ago on a boat called the Havana. Around 250 of them settled here for good, and so in time, their culture and their traumatic history was passed on to a second generation. In some cases, the children of the Basque children grew up, like me, fully aware of their Spanish background. Other families put all that behind them and got on with their new life, their children only learning the story later on. To be the child of a refugee is to have a dual identity, Spanish and English, though of course individual stories differ.
You were slightly different, if you like. I mean, yes, you spoke English, at home we spoke Spanish. The house was always full of Spanish people coming in and out, whether they were, like my parents' fellow Basque children, or whether they were Spanish Republicans that were maybe slightly older who'd fought in the Civil War. And so you knew that you were slightly, I wouldn't say different, but there was a different bow to you. There was a different perspective on life.
My name's Carmen Coupland, and my mother's name was Maria de los Angeles Dueñas Montes. She always talked about her family and her childhood in Spain, but she never actually talked particularly about the war or the terrible experiences that they'd had. There was no Spanish spoken in the household, so we didn't really live in an environment in which we were immersed in the language.
In my particular family, Spanish was spoken at home every day. Up to the age of 5, we all spoke Spanish. We all understood Spanish. Then when we went to school, we wanted to be English.
As a child, I definitely tried to be stereotypically Spanish. I liked to look like a cowgirl down in the south in Andalusia, because this was my concept of Spain. It wasn't, my concept of Spain as a child was not the Basque idea.
Manuel Moreno, Carmen Coupland and David Cabrera. Their family's decision to settle over here wouldn't really have been foreseen at the time of the evacuation. Their own parents probably meant it when they said the separation would be a brief one, and the exodus itself had been put together at short notice. The shocking news of the bombing of Guernica had finally persuaded the British government to put aside political objections and accept the refugees. By then, the situation was desperate.
Proud Bilbao was was surrounded, blockaded from the sea. And as air raid sirens howling, to the refuge we would flee. And as desperation mounted, rumours came to be that a ship would sail for England, and through the night our mothers queued to set us free.
My parents wanted us to come out because of the fighting. It was terrible. We didn't know whether we would survive or not because of the German planes kept coming over, and the Italians, they were fighting for Franco. And my father thought it would be better for us to get out. At first, when Papa told us about it, I thought, oh, well, it's only like little time away from home. But when the actually time came to say goodbye to Mama, of course, I didn't want to come. I screamed and I cried and I held on to my mother, but eventually my sister and my brother, they took my hands and more or less dragged me towards the docks where the boat was.
Josefina Stubbs, who was 10 years old at the time. Of course, the tears and confusion were shared by most of the children.
My parents put our names down, 3 of us, and we boarded the ship, I think it was on the 20th of May 1937. And the last thing my parents said to my sister, look after your brother and sister, please. And as we said goodbye, embracing crying, they said, it's only for 3 months, only 3 months.
When my mother said to me, you're going away in a boat on the sea, you're going to another country, and you'll be all right. It's only for 3 months, so don't cry, and we'll be together in 3 months' time. So I remember, as if it was yesterday, when she embraced us in a place called Santurce, where we boarded the boat, and kissing me, and she was crying, and her tears were falling on my cheeks. And then when I saw my mother crying, I started crying, then my sister. A lot of the children were crying, but we didn't know what was really happening.
I didn't realise the finality of it until we were alone on board. And it was terribly crowded in a boat that was meant for some 400 passengers. We were very nearly 4,000 children, plus 100 teachers and more or less 100 young women to help with the younger ones. So it was awfully crowded. We knew no one at all, and I was just with my brother, totally alone. And of course, I realised then that we had been separated from our families and our parents.
Agustina Cabrera, Paco Robles, and Hermino Martinez.
On the 23rd in the morning of May, we arrived. We got up and we were in England, in Southampton, and there was doctors. I remember doctors on deck giving us injections. And then the buses were out down on the dock. A lot of coaches, a lot of buses, and they were taking us to Eastleigh, to Stoneham Camp. And all along the route there were flags, flowers on lampposts and flags, and we thought we were very important people because they put up the flags, but it turned out that it was the coronation of King George VI. A week before that, I think, and that's why the flags were still up.
We had in the camp, there was a loudspeaker system. Every morning they played music for us to get up, and announcements were made over the loudspeaker. And an announcement was made after a lot of consideration as to whether it should be made and how it should be made. It was announced that Bilbao had fallen, trying to put it in terms that would sort of be understood, but of course the reaction was total hysteria.
The fall of Bilbao put an end to the belief that this exile could be only for 3 months, and many of the children began a nomadic life, travelling between temporary homes all over the UK.
For 8 long years then we travelled, moving from town to town, enjoying the kindness of strangers. We feared not the xenophobes' frown, but my thoughts turned to Spain when my spirits ran low, staring at rain through a dusty window. Oh, that silver Douro.
Charities, philanthropists, churches, political activists all played a part in caring for the Basque children. And for some of the many Britons who helped out, this contact with the Spanish children would leave its mark on their own lives. At 15, Leonard Palmer was already involved in politics. And when Spanish children were brought to live near his home in North East London, he wanted to help.
We would cycle out on a Sunday afternoon and we would take a bar of chocolate and, I dare hardly mention it now, but a packet of cigarettes. The children thought that was marvellous because they had actually nothing. And just to get a bit of chocolate and a puff of a cigarette was all the world to them. It was bare necessities. There were no luxuries whatsoever. They were clean, they were clothed decently, they were fed. I first learnt about tortilla in 1937 because that was one of the staple diets at Woodbury. There was one girl, she would stand on a table. She was slim, tall, she'd be about 13 or 14 years of age, and she would do a flamenco dance, hitting the table with her shoes and twirling around, etc. She had no castanets, but she used to go through the actions with her fingers as if she did have castanets, and she would entertain us for 5 minutes doing this flamenco dance on a table. They were just pleased to see us because I think they realised that we had an element of care for them. Although we didn't have a lot to give them, it was an act of solidarity with them, and whenever we went to Woodbury, we always received a good welcome. We would play table tennis with them. We would play football with them. There was a huge area around the house. It was a large detached house. We'd stay there maybe 3 hours and then cycle back home in the evening.
Colonies like the one Leonard visited were common, and the Basque children were shipped around the country from one to another. The prospect of getting an education was even more uncertain. Paco found his own way to get by.
After about a year, we went to another place called Wicken Market in Ipswich, and that place was horrible because it was a very old place and it was full of rats, and I am dead scared of a mouse, not a rat. We were there for a while, and then they said, right, we're going to teach you English. I said, well, then we're not here for 3 months, and almost a year had gone by. So what's the point of me learning English if we're going back soon? I mean, English to me sounded as German sounds now to me. You know, I couldn't possibly learn it. But they said, you must. I said, but I already know English, I said. Well, what do you know? I said, well, I know a few words. Well, what are they? I said, well, I think so. Because everyone, we had a lot of navvies building the road outside where we were, and they were always talking to us. And they said, well, what's your name? I think so. And how old are you? Oh, I think so. And everything they asked, I responded, I think so. And they had a good laugh. They hugged me, they gave me sweets. I think so. And this is my name then. They were calling me I think so. I'm sure they used to say, well, look, Harry comes I think so. Let's have a good laugh with him.
But there were no laughs in store for some of the evacuees. They relied on the kindness of strangers. It wasn't always on offer. Juanita Vaquer was sent with her sister to an enclosed convent. She was there for 6 years.
I don't even remember arriving in the convent in Didsbury in Manchester. But my life there was very hard. We had no money, we had nothing. It was an enclosed convent for 6 years. We never went out. We went out for walks, but, you know, all in a file with a couple of nuns accompanying you. But we didn't know anything. The doctor came to us to interview us, and he said to the nun that was in the room with us, "I want you to leave." He said, "Because I want to talk to the girls." And she said, "We can't leave a man with a 14 and a 15-year-old girl. That's her." So he said, "Go now." He opened the door and said to her, "Just go. What do you think I'm going to do with the girls?" And he wanted to know, and of course he started speaking to us in Spanish. We didn't know any Spanish. We hadn't spoken Spanish. And because I was not allowed to speak to my sister, and every time I saw her, you couldn't speak in Spanish. So we both forgot our Spanish. Because he started then in English saying to us, "Are you happy?" And we said, "Can we go home?" That's all we wanted.
Juanita's long stay in the convent had become lonelier still after most of the other girls left. In some cases, returning home to Spain.
When at last peace had returned, I started to count the days. But the cruel revengers of Franco, you implored me to stay away from a boy.
But news of life in Franco's Spain was hard to come by, and sometimes hard to bear. That was something Leonard Palmer, the English boy, came to know.
There was one girl, Pilar Cortez, who I was rather interested in. I think you might say at that age, first love or something. I used to talk with Pilar, and we never used to hold hands, touch or cuddle or anything like that. And I used to like Pilar, and then she left Woodbury and she went to live with a family at Acton. I thought this was disaster, but one day I decided I would go and visit Pilar. So I cycled from Edmonton through all the traffic of London over to Acton, saw Pilar, and they asked me to stay for tea, which I did, and that was the last that I saw of Pilar Cortez. My friend Dennis, he established links with Spanish children who maintained links with those that returned to Spain. So we got information back. Not a lot, but about the situation, which was pretty ghastly in Spain. And the last I heard about Pilar Cortez through what we called the grapevine was that she had actually died in France. What the true story is, I will never, ever really know. But at the time I heard that she died of starvation, which was very upsetting.
And of course there were more tragedies to share. But for Agustina, news from Spain was more hopeful.
When we were in the colony, my sister got a letter from a lady who had been visiting, the Spanish refugee camps, and she found my mother. My mother found her. There was an English lady there, and she told her that she had 3 children in England. She didn't know where they were. So when this lady returned to England, she must have got in touch with the Basque Children's Association or committee, and they gave her the address, and she wrote to my sister to say that she had been with my mother and my brothers, and they were all right. So that was better than Christmas.
Renewed contact was one thing, but for many children, going home to Spain seemed no closer.
In 1945, up to 1945, all of us thought we would be going back. And there was enthusiasm as the war was ending, because this would be the end of fascism in Europe, including Franco. But of course, shortly after the end of the war, the Cold War started, and Bevin, the British foreign minister, made it clear that Franco was to be an ally, and we realized that we couldn't go back.
Many evacuees realised by now they would have to settle in the UK. Find work, get married, have children. By 1951, some 250 of the original refugees were still here. Travel to Spain slowly became easier. The families who went included original evacuees such as Herminio Martinez, and now the second generation, among them David Cabrera and Manuel Moreno. For all three, the political climate came as a shock, and Spain did not feel like home.
We went back, we went to Spain, and we encountered such an incredible state of affairs. And on meeting my family, I was warned, Herminio, don't talk to anyone, don't trust anyone. If the civil guard fine you, pay and don't argue, and do not sing the songs you used to sing when you were here. So it was a warning. And of course, one saw the civil guard that were feared, armed to the teeth, and the fear of people was quite shocking, really.
You felt that you had an association with it, but you couldn't identify what the association was, because you didn't relate to it. It was very, very poor.
One of the things I've always remembered was, I think it was the first time we drove to Spain. It was a Spanish couple, Manolo and Paquita. Now, Manolo had fought during the Civil War, and we drove down. It was 2 days, I think it took, to drive from London to the French-Spanish border, and then thinking we'd all be crossing over together, Manolo had to stop the car. He couldn't go into Spain. He was still wanted. There was still a death sentence on him, and his wife had been a nurse in the Spanish Civil War. And I remember thinking, they went to a campsite overlooking Spain in France, and they looked down into Spain, and their family had to come to them. They couldn't go into Spain. He couldn't go back to Spain until Franco died. That said an awful lot about what Spain was about and what Franco was about.
Among the evacuees, most of those who weren't totally isolated had tried to preserve their culture and to pass it on to their children. I spoke Spanish at home and was surrounded by Spanish people as I was growing up. And of course I owe my love of the guitar to Spain. But the identity some of our families had cultivated would not have been recognised in Franco's Spain, as Herminio found.
The thing is this, you see, how Spanish did I feel? Now, I was very Spanish. I am very Spanish now, in many ways, but I'm not the Spaniard of present-day Spain. I always describe myself as the product of those wonderful years of the Republic, because the people who influenced me were, in fact, these young Republican intellectuals who were also in exile, and some of them working with us in the colonies. So we had contact with that sort of Spaniard who were the products of that renaissance, cultural renaissance in Spain that was brought about just prior to the Republic and during the Republic. So in that respect, and with my studies, of course, I belong more to that generation than to when I meet Spaniards of my age, many of them illiterate, totally ignorant of what went on, indoctrinated, and this was one of the problems I encountered with my own family.
The families of the Basque children, the Niños Vascos, are still growing. 75 years on, they are grandparents, great-grandparents. I've got children of my own, children who are less Spanish than I am and more remote from that family history. Maybe this next generation will leave it behind, but I hope not. Carmen Copeland and Manuel Moreno, both like me, the niños of the niños, children of the children, feel strongly about the importance of sustaining memories.
We don't learn from our history. We think that we learn from history, but we don't. Over and over again, children are being made refugees. We see on the television, for instance, in the case of the Yugoslavian war, refugees traipsing along the roads. And whenever I saw those pictures on the television, I thought that that was my grandmother traipsing along the road from Bilbao to Paris.
There's this huge amnesia in Spain and loss of memory. So the previous government in Spain decreed that there should be a la memoria histórica, historic memory, so people should be talking about it. Talk about what happened, which is painful. And because it was hidden and dampened down for 40 years plus under Franco and after as well, then it's sort of bursting out in a distorted way, if you like, and that's fairly inevitable. You know, when you've oppressed something, it always comes out in a rather complicated way. It takes time and time and time to talk and discuss it openly. I think if you have something that was hidden, that is, you know, if you're Indian, for example, and you're born here, well, I suspect eventually you want to find out what it was like when Granny was living in the village near Delhi, You know, it seems fairly natural for human beings to want to search that out. In this particular case, it's a war, it's a civil war, then it's a world war, and then they were forgotten.
Solo por 3 meses we heard our mother say, and to England we were taken, and it's there for many years we were destined to stay.
Havana, The Children of the Spanish Civil War was produced by Amanda Brookshaw and was a Pacificus production for BBC Radio 4. In a few moments, Mark Steele is in Holyhead on Anglesey talking about sinking ships, fishy foot nibbling, the town's newest locals, Kate and Wills,